Greetings and salutations, fellow gamers. Lukey P here with another episode of Let's Play Supreme Ruler Ultimate with Brazil. So we are picking up from where we left off last episode, which is we've just conquered China, and that has left our economy slightly challenged on one or two things. So what I want to do this episode is a little bit of a wash up, I guess you might call it. I've been thinking about and looking at how comes we won the war with China, especially relatively quickly when I didn't expect to. I expected it to be a struggle to win, and also a little bit explain. The reason I think it is also explains a little bit why we've been struggling with South Africa actually. So I'm going to go through that, and then I'm going to talk about what we're going to do with the economy, and some strategies for helping to manage your economy when you're at war and your economy is not perfect. Because until now our economy has pretty much been perfect when we've been at war. We have had nothing really to worry about, as in we've had enough oil, which has been key to allowing our troops to move around. We've been making lots of money. All of our resources were basically perfectly aligned. We had spare capacity and slack in the economy. We basically had nothing to worry about. Now we've got, we've not got a lot to worry about, to be honest, but we've got some things which could be a bit better. So let's talk first of all about how we won the war with China. Now, I think one of the key things to the war with China, which was down here, let me turn on a different view to what I normally use, which is MacLeod overlay. So China had all of the green. They had this as well, which was loyal to Korea. I'm not sure Korea existed. It might have been part of Japan. And they had all this Japanese land as well. Now, when we started the war, I think we had about 1 million in troops, in manpower here, when I looked at this. So we had about 1 million, and they had, I think, 2.6-ish from memory. Now, what is telling is we, after an initial struggle to get over a stronghold down here where they seem to have absolutely massive numbers of artillery and absolutely tore some of our first units to shreds, we found that they didn't actually have that many units. So once we'd overcome kind of their initial stack of units, even though they still had a massive army count, that wasn't reflected in what we saw as our troops kind of tore across the Chinese mainland, encountering relatively little resistance. So towards the end of the war, I think in the last episode, there was a 10 to 15 day period where we captured like 75 to 100 million worth of population and rolled across a bunch of the country very quickly. And almost, the computer almost seemed to be advancing in spite of what I was telling it. So even though I didn't have many of these battle zones to be high priority and offensive, so you can see there, for example, the battle zone their capital's in had nothing set on it, and literally the computer controlling my units just kind of rocked up and conquered the capital of one of the largest nations in the world. Now, I think the reason for that is actually this number here is deceptive in terms of army staff because it includes garrisons. So what that means is the Chinese had absolutely massive territory, and Japan here. They had them stocked full of garrisons, which put this number up. Actually, in the field of battle, they couldn't field that many units. So one of the things I noticed as I started to put down spies en masse, so I can't look at espionage now, can I? Where's my espionage screen? Don't know. There we are. So I've now got a lot more spies because I discovered they were relatively useful and I was short of them and wanted to sabotage some stuff. But when I put spies down in various areas, and you would have seen this on the playthroughs, I didn't actually often see that many units. I saw an absolute ton of planes quite randomly. Loads and loads of patrol planes circling overheads in certain parts of the world. I saw a lot of bridging platoon around Nanking, but I didn't actually see that many units. And had I had my spies out earlier and been ready for a war, what I think I probably would have found, although I'm only speculating, but I think what I probably would have found at the start of the war is, looking around, they had a bunch of units I fought off initially, and they didn't really have any units to deploy in the field. The rest of them were garrisons sitting there, waiting to be overwhelmed almost, because, you know, in any given place, even if it had like 6 garrisons, which is a lot, and it's going to be a pain to get through, if they're surrounded on all sides by a mass of attacking units who are probably better than them and probably have got artillery, they're just sitting ducks waiting to die, basically. So garrisons are, you know, they can be problematic if you're trying to go toe to toe, you know, infantry to infantry. But when you've got tanks and various other things, yeah, they are just waiting to be picked off. So I think that was the reason we were able to beat China ultimately relatively easily. The other reason was this here and this here, by which I mean land production. So I had 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. So in effect, I had 30 land production at any one time. I'm just updating this as I'm talking. I had 30 land production at any one time, pumping out units to put onto the mainland. Actually, I had 2 more I captured there and some more down here as well. So yeah, even more than that, plus some in China I captured. But basically, I was able to field loads of units. So even as we lost a load of units, I'm replacing them pretty rapidly and in close proximity to battle, which is important. If I contrast it with what happened or is happening still in Africa. So here we are trying to fight, let's put on map ownership only. We are trying to fight against South Africa. We were fighting some of the UK colonies. South Africa kept sending units in and shooting at us even though they weren't officially at war with us, so eventually I used that as a excuse to declare war on them. That's how the war got started. We've been going back and forth between these 2 areas for a little while, which, given their, I mean, their military is nothing to be laughed at. It's 300,000. They've got a load of air force, and they do seem to be regularly pushing us back and making life very difficult for us. Now, I think the reason they're able to do that is on the African mainland here, I had just 5 land production units. or 5 land production factories. I noticed in my previous episodes I keep referring to them as plants or units or whatever. So when I say land production, it means stuff which makes land units. And 5 aircraft. And with that, I was trying to pump out enough to take large chunks of Africa. And what I've done here is I've come up against somebody who has all his forces localised. This president, Kwame Mandela. So he has all these forces localised. He has 10 build capacity and 17 air. So in effect, in this region, he has superior production capabilities to me. I only have 5 land and 5 air. He has 10 and 17. So for all my money and my economic power and my massive population, I can't put units on the ground as quickly here as I'm losing them, and I can't put them on the ground as quickly here as he's potentially able to build them. Which means in terms of local superiority, I'm struggling against a nation who on paper I should crush very easily. And even though I'm sending, so you'll notice dots here, there are various there are various units going across from South America and back to South America because no one's really patrolling this sea. I'm pretty free to send units back and forth between the two. I don't think South Africa actually has any naval production facilities now, so I'm not going to lose that much sending units back and forth. But even with that, we are still struggling because we don't have local superiority, and even worse, we don't seem to have many anti-air units because the computer doesn't seem to want to build them. If we had some of our good AA guns around here, we would probably shoot a large number of their planes out of the sky pretty sharpish. But we have none. So there's a unit type imbalance here as well as a force imbalance. And that's why South Africa was a struggle, whereas in China, to be honest, past the episode 2 episodes ago where I was struggling a bit around here with their massed artillery, I didn't really direct any of my forces in China. I just kind of let the computer get on with it. I was focused on producing stuff. I was focused on playing some tactical games over in Africa, trying to pick off units one by one. I didn't really have to worry that much about China, which was interesting. So I think that's an important lesson for people trying to fight wars, is have your land production, if you can at all, in the area you're fighting. Have local superiority of production, particularly if if you've got money galore like I have and population galore now. There's no reason, when I fight India I'm going to use these production facilities, but when I start getting over to Europe, I'm probably going to smack a load of land production there and use that to take the Middle East. And maybe I'll put a load of land production there and use it to take. So having your land and your production near to your front line is obvious, but I didn't realise quite how key it was. The other thing I found fighting China is the importance of going around strong points. Now this is, for any of you military historians, this is a well-established tactic from the German blitzkrieg tactic in World War II, which was in effect, blitzkrieg means lightning war. In effect, they would often bypass enemy strong points, leave them cut off, so their tanks would drive around them, cut them off, and then their infantry would mop them up when they're cut off and demoralised and surrounded in effect. The way we eventually took this, and I mean it seems bizarre, but this village was probably the most difficult and bloody battle of the war in terms of the sheer number of units we lost, We ended up sending a load into kill zones. They had massed artillery whose range was 41 kilometres, which was the same range as our longest range artillery. So we couldn't simply outgun them. And in the end, it wasn't actually me trying to get units within a range or bombard things which got them. It was the units being able to retreat there eventually to that barracks. So when they took damage, they went there, healed, and then went back. And in the end, the computer control of my forces ended up sweeping a bit round here, which meant these guys were cut off. And one thing I did notice is that as we started to take that, they had units coming at them here, here, and here. And their artillery was only firing in one direction, obviously, which meant the other guys weren't suppressed and had free shots. And that was what brought down that strong point in the end. You also saw it in the capital. At the end of last episode, the computer controlled units looped around and they ended up attacking the capital from all sides, which was excellent. And that was how the war with China was won, I think. So hopefully that's been useful in terms of hints and tips. The other thing I do just want to talk about for a little bit, but not a long time. I'm probably not going to play much tonight because it's quite late where I am. But in terms of balancing our priorities, so we still have two enemies. We have Uyghuristan, who are a former Chinese colony and still are a colony. They're only going to have garrisons. Our main challenge with them is, where is the supply? Literally, there's just barely anything there. So in order to actually conquer that, I am going to have to build supply hubs all the way along this route. And I will set about doing that probably off camera. But in effect, to get the units here, we need a clear supply hub to be able to move units. And you can see here, I mean, look, there's just nothing there. There's a industrial production with literally nothing there. So yeah, we will have to build some supply hubs just to be able to get our units moving across to there without conking out along the way. How will we do that? That will be our standard approach of one airbase and 2 supply depots, which gives you pretty much 100% supply and spreads it out in a nice manner. So if I look at what I did in Brazil, so you will see there are still some areas which are a bit light on supply, but you can see, for example, around here there is pretty decent supply, and that comes from this guy. 1 airbase, 2 supply depots. Over here, 1 airbase, 2 supply depots. Over here, 1 airbase, 2 supply depots. And that basically makes a little chain so that my units can move across my country without running out of supplies. And when I started the game, right back in my very first episode, if any of you recall that far back, I did comment on how supply was one of Brazil's big problems and I would be looking to fix it over time. And in effect, that's what I've done with those little supply hubs. I mean, you can see here there's a little bit of struggle, and perhaps I should be building a supply hub in the middle there to help units move around. But I haven't done that yet. And that's the kind of approach. And I should probably build one there as well. But that is how we will be fighting the war with them. We need to build up here. To fight with South Africa, we need to apply the lessons we've just learnt from China, which is we are building, so we've built another 5 land production there, we've got a supply depot there, and we are building another 5 land production there. So we're now going to have 15 on this African continent. I will go for more eventually, but I think kind of 10 there, 5 up there, maybe build another 5 up there, probably maybe a 5 down here as well. But just in effect keeping these things spread out and able to produce units to bring me some local superiority in Africa. And in fact, thinking about it, I think I am going to build, so this seems relatively central here. I think putting, just check we're not building on top of any, yes, I thought we might be. Uranium galore around this part of the country. So let's not build on top of that, let's build there, just in case we need that uranium in future. So land production. We don't really have many air unit production slots either, do we here? So let's see, have we got a military base? We have, haven't we? But it's not really that secure, I don't think. It's somewhere down here. Yeah, there it is. Airfield military complex. As we've got our units here and they're assisting, let's build aircraft production next to that. So that should give us some good local superiority in Africa, certainly over South Africa anyway. And then just in terms of balancing the economy, so something we need to look at doing is probably those little, no, this is the wrong screen, those little production will push our industrial goods consumption ever higher, which we need to sort out. We need to have a look after a few ticks at our supply in the Chinese lands we've just taken. So if I have a look here, for example, at the moment the supply here is pretty dire. But if we had great supply here, we've got a massive amount of production capabilities. And yes, there is the risk of rebels, and in previous episodes I said I like to have most of my production capabilities in Brazil itself. But in these circumstances, the question is, do I want to build lots and lots of new plants using industrial goods back in Brazil, or do I want to build an air base and 2 supply depots and have all this at 100% production, 100% supply, and therefore go into 100% production? I want to do the latter. It's going to be vastly superior to really build up and do what we did with Brazil in the first kind of 10 or so episodes, I guess, which is look around. We need to give it a few ticks to see what the supply is looking like before we build any air bases and supply hubs. But then we need to focus on building them in key areas. So around here, I would want this whole area to be 100% supplied pretty much, and this whole area to be 100% supplied pretty much. And, you know, I'll be looking for key areas within China as well. Now, China's not as built up as Japan was, but there's no reason, for example, here, if that's not, I mean, that's average supply, but having that and 2 supply there, I mean, that sounds like a pretty good idea. So for example, this should have an airbase and 2 supply depots, and then all around here we'll have 100% supply. So we join them up and all of a sudden these are doing a lot better. We could have a look down here. So there are some which need scrapping, and we do a lot of that off camera, but there are also some where I would hazard a guess. If I look at some, I will probably find some where, yeah, for example here, Chengdu. So we've had that for a little bit. It's got some kind of useful units around, or useful production facilities around here. So if I turn all these back on and say, yep, you know, rebuild them, and then I say, hey, there's already an airbase there, make that active, build all these, and then also put down a couple of supply depots. That's not going to be 100% around there when that's finished. Which again just helps make things that little bit more efficient and productive over time. So that example there, I'm not going to go around and do that for the whole country on camera, but I probably will do it off camera, and that is how I make my economy very strong on this game. It may not be the way everybody wants to play it. You know, some people just want to focus on putting units down and getting to war, and that's a perfectly valid way to play the game. It works for a lot of people. My way to play the game is I like to get the economy really strong and use that as a springboard to you know, not really have to worry much about anything really. We've been making money for loads of episodes, we've been able to produce whatever we want, we've had spare slack in our economy, you know, we've been, yeah, sure, at various times our production costs have been higher than the market price, but often, to be honest, the market can't support the level of stuff we need. So if I look at market availability of consumer goods, that's poor. We've always got to produce that ourselves, and part of the reason it's poor, of course, is that consumer goods need rubber, and if I look at top producers, no one can produce rubber now. So if I think about it, there used to be a country which produced, I think, 15 to 20,000 tons a day, called the what was it called? I've started telling a story and forgotten it. The Malay States, the British Malay States, they used to produce most of the world's supply of rubber. Now, I have the world's supply of rubber pretty much in my back pocket. I can produce as much rubber as I want. I've got 35 active of 181. Right, so I really don't have to worry about producing. Let's put that up. I really don't have to worry about producing rubber, because literally I can just turn it on whenever I want. So that means the rest of the world is probably going to struggle with consumer goods and with whatever else rubber is used for. So rubber is used for military goods as well. So it's going to make the rest of the world is going to have to invest in very expensive synthetic rubber production plants. I, for the most part, just turn on production in this part of the world. So, you know, here, look, not even got them turned on or finished building, and the supply is pretty rubbish. So again, we'll build up supply around this area so that if we ever turn these on, we will have great supply like we've got here. for example. So you can see that that has given us 100% supply, and I'm not quite sure how the supply is only 88% right next to it, but yeah, there's no reason not to use some of these, because they are just you know, they are pretty much at maximum capacity, so you get the most benefit. That is the basics of the economy and the supply model we went through right at the very start, and that's what we will be looking to do post this war with China. Now, the one big problem we do have is petrol. So we need 7 million more barrels per day than we're going to get in. That is a significant problem. The place we could get it from is the US, except the US hate us. So if I go to the US and say, hey, do you guys want to sell me some petrol, and do you guys want to sell me, I don't know, 100 billion barrels, for instance, they want to charge me, oh, actually I don't really care about that, I'd probably actually pay that, but even then that won't last long, because I'm going through 7 million barrels a day. So this is critical, because if you look at the things which use this, there's industry, there's military, there's consumer, there's electric power, and my military is using 30,000 barrels a day just to move around. So, you know, you need to take some steps in this situation to think about, well, how am I going to cut my demand quite dramatically, if indeed I can? Well, the first thing I'm going to do is say, actually, $6 from the start of the game. This is inflation. So $6 was the price we were willing to import petrol at. I'm now going to say I'm happy to import it up to like $85, because I don't care about money. I care about keeping my economy going. So now these guys will happily import petrol when they need it. I'm also going to say, hey, let me buy a bunch. So if I want to buy 100 million on the market ish, that's going to cost me about 7 million. Whereas when I tried to buy it from the US, because they don't like me, you'll see I pay a premium. So they want me to pay 8.1 million for stuff which cost them 5 million to make. So, you know, maybe the US will be selling it to me via the market, but I can be buying that from here. And again, you know, how much does that cost me? 7 billion. Well, I'm making 3 billion a day, plus 700 million of exports. So 3.5 billion. So it's 2 days worth of revenues. It's irrelevant for us now. At the start of the game, we're having to be very careful about what we spend. Now it's simply a matter of we spend what we need. The other things we can do is we can actually stop our military units moving around, because they're using 37,000 barrels a day, but that's not a great deal, is it really? The civilian demand is 12.8 million barrels, which is the most of anything. We could do with cutting that. And even though our prices are high already, and it will be unpopular, we're going to put our prices up to that to reduce demand. And in due course we can put them back down. But right for now, I need to cut civilian demand for petrol. What else can I do? Well, I appear to be using some petrol and electricity, not a lot, but on principle, we're going to have a look. Petrol power plants. I don't want any of them at all. Scrap them all. Any small petrol power plants? No. So all those are now scrapped, which is fine because I've got loads of electricity. I'm selling 3 million units of it a day, so scrapping those 9 doesn't really matter. And we will play, you know, we can play a few ticks and see what does that actually do to our petrol supply. We can have a look in China, for example, and see, is there anywhere with a lot of petrol fields? I don't think there is really. But if there was and it had rubbish supply, then we could look to improve the supply in that area. So for example here we're building 2 supply depots. We've got an air base, we've got a half-built industrial complex, so why wouldn't we make that somewhere we build a bunch more petrol pumps. But to be honest, if we've got to build them, if we've got to build them, I'm probably going to look to build them around Brazil, fun enough. So we can have a look and we can find some parts of Brazil where we already have a high supply, because we've got things in the area which are boosting our supply, and we can say, you know, I think it's a great idea to build some more petrol there. So that's the kind of tactic and approach we're going to be taking off screen. I appreciate I haven't actually played at all this episode really. In fact I haven't actually set that to fast, which means I haven't changed anything. But we've spoken a bit about tactics in war, about how we managed to defeat a large nation such as China, about understanding a bit more about this army staff measurement here. We've spoken about supply again, and revisited some of the lessons we did earlier on about supply and economy and building a strong and productive economy. And we've spoken a bit about how we're going to continue the wars with South Africa and these guys, Uyghuristan, who are the ex-Chinese colony. And in due course we will probably start looking at India as our next conquest. But this episode has gone on a little bit longer than I planned, but hopefully you found that useful. Any comments or questions, please do let me know below the video. As ever, if you've liked, please do like. If you've really liked, please do subscribe. Thank you for watching. I'm Lukey P, and I will see you again soon.